All right. Hi there. My name is Jessica Crow, and I am the founder of Apogy. Apogy is a change management training, coaching, and consulting firm. And this is the Change Leader Speaker Series. And I'm super excited. Today I have here with me Robert Bogue. Do you go by Robert, Bob? What do you prefer?
Rob, actually.
Rob. Oh, okay.
There you go, right in the middle.
Well, he is here to chat with me about all things change management, and he's got a lot of background, history, expertise in this space. So really excited to have him on the, I'm going to use air quotes, show. Rob, sorry, would you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, where you work, and then I've got some questions for you to get us started.
Yeah, so I run two companies, one called Thor Projects, the other one called Tech. Thor Projects is the consulting arm that takes care of clients and helps them get things done. And a lot of times the history has been with technology projects. I'm 18 years as a Microsoft MVP. We've done just dozens and dozens of projects for customers. And the other thing, which is particularly relevant to our conversation today, is put together the confidentchangemanagement.com website, which includes assessments and book reviews and just all kinds of stuff that hopefully helps make it easier for people to initiate and successfully complete change in their environments.
Got it. Yes. So thank you. And when I was poking around on your website, I came across some information around this concept of wicked problems. And so I thought that was a really interesting topic and way of thinking about how you approach change and implement change. Do you mind just giving us an overview of what this concept of wicked problems is? Because part of, again, for everybody who's watching this, it's meant to educate, inspire, inform. So would love to hear a little bit more about this, because I thought it was a really great way of thinking as a change management professional.
Yeah, so this isn't so the idea of wicked problems isn't mine. It was started by a guy by the name of Horst Riddle. And so 1970s, 1973, in fact, he and Melvin Weber were working on urban planning problems. And, you know, that's where do you put the highway and how do you do zoning and all that stuff, right? It's really about how do you help the society, the community be better. Mm-hmm. And what he began to realize is that there are some problems that have no solution, mm-hmm. right? And more than that, he and his colleague articulated these 10 criteria for what makes something a wicked problem. And the first one is there's no definitive formulation of the wicked problem. In other words, you can't get to the exact specific way to describe the problem in a way that everyone will understand and agree. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it's hard to solve. The second thing he said was wicked problems have no stopping rule. In other words, there's no end, right? Like, I want things to be better. Well, how much better, and how would you measure it? And right, and quality of life sorts of things don't have a stopping rule. The next thing he said is that they're not true or false, good or bad. There's no dichotomies here. There's no, it's not binary. Then he said there's no immediate or ultimate test of a solution. In other words, we could try to do the solution, but we're not really going to know if it really worked because there is no ultimate test. Mm-hmm. And so these are the kinds of things that he was coming up with for wicked problems. And what I find is that it often describes the sorts of problems that we're dealing with in organizations, in government, in social issues. And it's not perfect because, you know, all the definitions say, well, you can't solve this. Mm-hmm. But it informs a framework. I think the big insight that Riddle had was, it's not that you're trying to solve it as much as you're just trying to make it better.
Right.
Right. And I think I think as change agents, as change managers, as change leaders, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make things better.
Right.
And so I like it as a tool to help us understand that not everybody's going to see things the same way. Not everybody's going to agree that this is the right solution, but how do we work together on making things better?
Yeah. And what are some of the things, I mean, because as you were describing that too, I think, culture change came to mind in an organization, which is difficult because culture is a composite of people's individual values and then the organization's values, and values are these deeply held beliefs, and there's no right or wrong. It's just what it is. And so that's why culture change is so hard at a, organization or national level. What are some of the, I guess, is there in your experience, a way to approach this from a process perspective, or a way of thinking that can get people who are in change leadership roles to, if they are trying to make a change in an organization or wherever, what would you recommend, like a starting point for them to be to move down that path of making things better?
Well, so I think the first thing that we have to recognize is that we live in systems, and one thing implements another, and loopbacks and all of that stuff. And for the folks that haven't been exposed to all of that, Donella Meadows has a really great book, Thinking in Systems. The subtitle is a primer. It was published posthumously, and it really talks about, if we're going to go work in systems, how do we manipulate them? How do we change them? How do we make them different? I think then we've got to talk about, how do we get everyone on the same page, or at least accept that the same page exists? When we're teaching on conflict, we teach that conflict only comes from two sources. One time I was doing that in an audience, and someone said Bill and Susie, and I'm like, no, it's not people. Like, I mean, it's people, but it's not two people, right? So the first thing that we tell people is different is perspective.
Yep.
Right. Like, I just see it differently. Have you ever been to Mount Rushmore?
No, and I do want to go. It looks fascinating, but tell me where you're going with this. Yeah.
Okay. So Mount Rushmore, for those of you who have not seen it, first of all, this is in a state that had the marketing slogan, "Meth, we're on it." Okay. Really do. And I've got the pictures of that. So if you need it, send me.
We might have to share that.
2, they have a national park named Lands. Now, if I'm trying to draw people into my state, I am not going to name my stuff bad. Okay. So nobody goes to South Dakota, like nobody. Right.
Yeah.
And so they're like, hey, let's do something just crazy. Let's make a 60-foot statue carved into the side of a mountain. And that's what they did. Right. And or mostly did. And it's great. It's the 4 faces. And you go to the visitor center and you look up and you're like, whoa, this is big. But if you get into a plane, get in a little plane, and by the way, you're leaving Rapid City Airport, and they're like, hey, we're going to go see the faces, because that's what they call them out there.
The faces.
So go to the faces, and they're tiny. When you put them in a different context, right? When you put them in the context of the mountains and the wilderness they're tiny.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is the story I use for people as we're talking about perspective, which is right. Are they big or are they small? Yes, both, neither. And so I use that to try and help people think, even though you don't see it the same way as the other person, doesn't mean their perspective's wrong. They're just seeing it from a different lens.
That's a great way of putting it.
So the second thing that we talk about when we're talking about conflict is values. And people love that, their values. For this, I generally start having a conversation about Jonathan Haidt's work. Now, I love Jonathan Haidt's work, The Coddling of the American Mind, the Righteous Mind, which is what I'm going to come to in a second, the Happiness Hypothesis. He's done some really great work about how do we interact with human beings. So, the Righteous Mind. He covers the foundations of morality.
Okay.
He says, look, we're all moral people, except for those crazy people who are, psychopaths. But we're basically moral people. When we get into disagreements, even heated disagreements, we're getting into a disagreement because we value things differently. Not that we have different values, but we value them differently. And his criteria or his foundations were things like care, harm. We all believe that people should be cared for and not harmed. All of us. We believe in fairness and not cheating. We believe in authority and not subversion. We believe in liberty, not oppression. Right? Now, you can say, well, no, I don't believe in liberty. I think everybody should be oppressed. Well, you're
Right.
probably not going to say that. Right. But the question is, when those values, when those foundations of morality come in conflict, which do you choose? Which one do you go after? What's the threshold at which you're willing to stand up for that? And that's the difference. And so I work when I work on conflict and I work the values side of it, I'm working on, it's not that the other person is amoral. It's not that the other person is wrong. They just process it differently through the lens of their values.
Yeah.
So what most people don't realize, so economists don't study money. Everybody's like, oh, they study money. No, they study the behavior of humans as it relates to money.
Right.
Okay, so here's the truth. So they have this game called the ultimatum game, and you may have played this with your children, right? So here's the children version first. The children version first is you have one sandwich and you're going to split it, or one thing split between the two kids. The way you do this is one kid gets to choose the line where it's split. They use the knife. The second one gets to choose which piece is theirs.
Ah, okay.
And so the first one is, you want to get even, because if you don't get even, then the other person gets to pick the bigger side. In the ultimatum game, the adult version, they offer up $10 to two people. The first person gets to choose the split. The second person gets to choose whether they get them money at all, whether either person gets the money. So it creates an interesting problem. Now, what's cute about this experiment is, at what point does the second person say, nope, neither of us are getting the money?
Right.
It turns out that somewhere between 70, 80, so 70, 30, 80, 20 split, somewhere in there, there's this crossover point where people start really saying, no, this isn't fair. You've crossed the line. You've gone too far, and neither of us get the money. Now, by the way, the economist drives the economist nuts, because the economists are like, no, you're still $2 better than you started.
Right.
And we're like, yeah, but no, it's not right. He has to be fair. She has to be fair.
Right. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. I mean, that makes sense though. Well, so, and as you were talking before too, about it got me thinking about how a lot of folks in our practice think about resistance management, which to me is not something that lands well, because it's like, okay, it's just what it is. People are going to resist because of the values clash that can occur. So I like to lean into this concept of developing resilience, like how you respond to what's happening despite the situation. Have you, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you seem like a very well-read individual. So have you done any research or read any books or have any opinions on the role of resilience and how change leaders can lean into that and maybe circumvent some of the challenges related to values disconnect and the striving for fairness, and how people feel like things may be unfair in the organization when, change happens?
Yeah. So let me try and unwind that a bit. So I read a book every single week and I post a book review on my blog, and it eventually ends up on the Confident Change Management site.
That's fantastic.
I've been doing that for about 10 years.
So very well read.
I mean, I've read one or two things occasionally. Yeah. So second, I really don't believe in resistance. Not that, like, I get it exists, right? But I don't believe in conceptualizing it that way.
Right.
What I believe is there are two reasons for resistance. One is they don't understand. You have failed to communicate in a way that speaks to them, to their needs and them understanding it. Two, which is the one you highlighted, is the values clash. I don't agree, right? It's not that I don't understand. I moved beyond not understanding, and now I don't agree. And I think rarely are we truly working on things where someone's values should be that engaged, right? So Fifth Third Bank is a really interesting thing. So Fifth Third Bank was formed by the merger of two banks, and somewhere in the massive paperwork, somebody's head got really big and they said the fifth part has to be first, right? And so now you have this improper fraction that is the bank. It's 5/5 third, right? Like, wait a minute. Like it's an improper fraction. This is second grade math, right? Maybe it's fourth grade. I don't know, but it's not really hard to know, that it should be 1 2/3. It's 1 2/3 of a bank, not 5. For the most part, we're not killing people, right? Like I do a lot of work in healthcare. I really do. And the people think about it differently, because seriously, if you're not going to kill somebody, what are you all worked up about? And there are things that we work on that could potentially kill somebody. So right, they can get worked
Patient
up about
safety,
that. And I support
right.
Right. I'm on board for patient safety, 100%. But most of the stuff we're working on should not trigger people's values. It should not feel like we're being unfair, that we're denying people's liberties, that we're like, it shouldn't feel that way. And if we've somehow framed it that way, or allowed the conversation to devolve in that way, then we've done something wrong.
Right. Well, I agree with that. But at the same time, I think, what you're describing are some really deeply held, those values are sort of core to being a human. There's also values, like I value independence, and I value, health and prosperity, or whatever. Right. If there are things happening in an organization where suddenly I feel like I'm being controlled or it's unfair, right? That could be a clash of values as well. Maybe those are more surface level, but I think that's why, or at least I'm assuming that's why there's been this big focus on how do you manage resistance? How do you manage resistance? When I'm aligned with what you're saying, I don't really think it's, to your point, it's a clash of values at a high level, but it's also people don't understand or they disagree. So I don't know if that lands well with you or not, but
yeah. So I think what you're talking about, and again, it's the kind of the scale of the values, right? Like I gave you foundations of morality, which is pretty big and heavy.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we talk about is Stephen Rees's work. Stephen Rees was at the Ohio State University, which the folks in the Midwest are going to laugh because they know that you have to emphasize the for some unknown reason. But Stephen Rees, factor analysis, the behaviors. What are the motivators for your behavior? What are the things that drive people? And a lot of times we'll call these values. The 16 were power, independence, curiosity, acceptance, order, savings, honor, idealism, social contact, family, status, vengeance, romance, eating, physical activity, and tranquility.
You didn't have those memorized, right? If you did, that's incredible.
I've done it a few times, but I'm like, I'm not going to do that without a net. I pulled it up.
Okay. Phew, I was like, oh my goodness, that's amazing.
Yeah. But here's the thing about this stuff. And this is the same thing as Jonathan Haidt's work, right? It's not that we believe in one of these, but not the other. It's we put them together and one will win out over another. When two things are in conflict, which one do you choose?
Right.
And I think those are the level of values that you're talking about, and people will get wound up.
Yes.
And in change, the one that I always trip over is CDO. Oh, wait, sorry. So you may have heard order. If people get dysfunctional about it, they call it obsessive compulsive disorder. If they have a really, really bad, it's CDO because they put the letters in the correct alphabetical order.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Is that CDO?
Yeah. So we've run into those people, right? Like we've run into those people. Like it doesn't matter what you're changing. My number 2 pencil has to be yellow.
Right.
It can't be green.
Right. Right.
Why? Are you colorblind to green? Like,
got these strong. Yeah, that makes that is some people's reality though.
Right.
They have those preferences. Yeah.
And you could look at Amy Edmondson's work around psychological safety. And what are the, what is it that makes people feel threatened by change? Right. And the short answer is, well, what's it mean to me? Right. The short answer is, well, am I going to be okay? But the longer answer is, if all change is scary, then how do you become less scared by change? How do you make it safer?
And then how do you?
You build trust. and you create guardrails, safety rails for safety, right? Go through a merger, right? So you go through a merger. At the very outset, you do two things. One, you guarantee that no one will be laid off until at least X date. And two, you guarantee some degree of benefits. You just flat out, you make it a part of the merger deal, right? Here's what you've done. Here's what you've done for employees. You've said, you have time. Now they won't do anything, but that actually is not the point. And we have your back. This is the way that we're going. This is the minimally good way that we're going to treat you, right? We guarantee you that you will at least do this. And so what happens is the employees get the opportunity to think about this in the context of, well, I know they've committed to this and they're going to do it. So they can then plan, because this is we're planners, right? We want to predict. They want to plan their world. You know what? I can hang out until March because I know they've said it, that I have a job at least until May. And if I don't like what's going on in March, I can make the call. I can choose to be upset then or concerned then because I'll have 2 months. And then they said severance is a minimum of X. And you know what? I just assume that I'll be okay. I can get to an end that's safe for me and my family. Now, not very many people do that. Not very many leaders, and I use that word a little loosely at the moment, executives have the emotional intelligence, forethought, concern, and compassion for their people to understand what their fears are at a level that allows them to be responsive.
Right. And that, I mean, that's in any context, not just in the context of a merger and acquisition. Yeah. I mean, I think, I agree. And I think there's more awareness of the need for compassion and empathy as part of emotional intelligence as an executive. And I'm hopeful that we're seeing a trend in more conversations and creating space for that psychological safety that you're describing and the trust building. But it's interesting too, though, we've got 5 generations of people in the workforce, and how you grew up in an organization may be reflective of your leadership style and your perspective on how to engage people in the workplace, engage, lead, however. So I think that creates an interesting dynamic on many levels of how self-aware people are, and whether or not they even care to be self-aware based on kind of how they were led and now how they are leading. So what are your thoughts on, becoming, so one thing that I will train and coach clients on is change management is something you do, but a change leader is who you are. And it's not just knowing structure and process and all the systems, what have you. It's also about the human being. And so how do you show up in a way? What are your thoughts on developing leadership skills alongside some of the technical skills and capabilities of being somebody who understands how to lead, impact, influence, inspire change at the organization level? How important is it, I guess?
It's very important. And I want to circle back, pick up resilience, because I know that I didn't really directly hit that earlier. So let's tie that all together. So first of all, the mechanical skills of managing stuff, you don't need an expert leader at.
Right.
And I'm not minimizing management. I'm not minimizing project management or project coordinators, please do not hear me to say that. They're invaluable. I know that it is not my core skill to go look at all the details every single day. I can't do it. It drives me batty. So I don't want to minimize that. But those are the things which can be systematized. You can have the right forms and the right blah, 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 and it becomes a system and it executes. The stuff that's really hard to do is to figure out how to engage people, how to bring your whole self to work. And I think the one that the leaders that I work with, they struggle with the most is, how do I be appropriately vulnerable?
Right.
Oh my gosh. Right. And so I think you know, it's one of those things where until you can get right with yourself, until you can do that internal work, which no one wants to do, you're going to struggle as a leader. You just are. So we have 7 kids. I mentioned this pre-show.
Yes.
We have 7 kids, all adults now. And my kids love to tell me, I hate adulting. I'm like, what adulting? This is a gerund. Where did that come from? Right. And they're like, I hate this because it's always hard work. I said, and then there's good rewards. And they're like, yes, but then the hard work comes first. I'm like, yes, it does. Welcome to the life lesson.
Right. How funny.
But we don't always do those things that are hard. We don't talk to our critic, right? Like I was in a presentation in Chicago Tuesday, and a guy came up and he was critical of some of the things I had to say, and I had to stand there. I didn't have to. I chose to stand there and listen. I chose to stand there, understand his perspective. I didn't have to agree with it,
right?
But I did at least owe him the courtesy of trying to understand it.
How'd it go?
It went fine. It went fine. I don't know that I convinced him that my perspective was a more accurate perspective or a better perspective. But for me, it helps me understand other people's perspective.
Right.
So one of the other perspective things that we do is there's this old picture of young lady, old lady. It's a
right.
table
the image. Yeah.
We use it all the time. So what's been interesting is you get old lady and young lady, right? Half and half. It's really pretty effective at that. But every third or fourth or fifth time, I'll get something that I've never heard before. Like there's an eagle eating that lady's head. And I'm like, what? And if
right.
you look at it, the shawl looks like it's an eagle eating the lady's head. And I'm like,
I can see that. Yeah, I guess.
I've never seen that before, but okay. Right? And I've not yet had Velociraptor or some of the other things that I'm like waiting for. Someone I'm sure is going to say Velociraptor. And I'm like, you got to do something different, man. but those perspectives are important, even if I don't agree with them.
Right. I mean, and so bringing it to this idea of resilience, it's you're developing your resilience response to, instead of getting upset or mad or engaging with the individual who had a different perspective than you in a negative way, you were able to hear him or her and just take it in. Right. So I think that's an important takeaway for people who are experiencing change and transition, who are in roles where they are being asked to facilitate a change or a transition. And, and you probably run into this too, I think, getting other leaders to understand and buy in and support and accelerate adoption is a component of that. And there's some frustration that can happen when they aren't making those connections as quickly or in the ways that they want to. And I always lean into, hey, do you know this individual as a person? Have you gotten to know them? Do you know how many kids they have? If they even have kids, do they have any pets? Get to know them on a human level, because then that's going to create a different experience and outcome and, different perspective. You'll start to understand why they're pushing back or they're not interested in your help or whatever it might be. So a big part of that resilience piece is developing your own resilience to the circumstances that you're experiencing or being asked to be a part of.
Yeah. And I super love the way that you have described resilience. I think I cringe a little bit when I hear the word, because everybody uses it so differently.
Do tell.
So let me start with one of the things that my wife and I did in 2019 was we wrote a book for SHRM's Society for Human Resource Management titled Extinguish Burnout, A Practical Guide to Prevention and Recovery. And so what people say to folks who are in burnout is, it's your toxic environment. Your company is toxic, right? And we work very hard to help people understand that they're empowered to make the changes in their life that they need to make. And some of those are going to mean leave the organization, right? But
Right.
that's not the first step. It's the
Right.
last step.
Right.
And so I worry about resilience because resilience is like snake oil. Like, oh, well, if you just have the snake oil, then you'll be okay. If you just were more resilient. And what we know about it, and if you look at Nassim Taleb's work, Anti-Fragile, you'll see that every bit of resilience, every bit of anti-fragility operates in a range, right? If you work out really, really hard one day and you don't give your muscles about 24 to 36 hours to rest before hitting them again, you will continue to break them down and they will not get stronger. Rather, they'll get weaker. If you give them the appropriate rest and you give them time to recover. So people talk about resilience, and resilience is your response to an event, a negative event generally. Well, is it at the right frequency, at the right time? We need hardship to survive. Take chicks, help them break out of their shells. Most people don't know this. You take a chick, you break it out of its shell because, oh my gosh, it's struggling to get out of its shell. You have committed it to a death sentence because they need that activity of breaking out of their shell. Sea turtles. Now, by the way, it's a federal law to interfere with sea turtles. Do not touch sea turtles. Now that we've got that out of the way. Sea turtles, born on the beach, have to find their way to the water. Right. And people are like, oh my gosh, I got to help the sea turtles. They're all running around and they're not going to the water. They need to be in the water. If you interfere with that process, if you interfere with that struggle, you will condemn them to death. They will swim in circles near the shore because they can't orient. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have hardship. In fact, I am a huge proponent of appropriate hardships, appropriate times with appropriate people, appropriate provisions. No. But sometimes people want to talk about resilience as if it's magic. It's not. It's a skill, and it has a limit. It has a capability. I do think we should develop it. And you develop resilience by exercising the skills that you want to enhance, just like you exercise if you want to get stronger. And I think you have to do it the right way. My daughter's a physical therapist. She just graduated as a physical therapist. Thank you. It's really more for her than me. I didn't do anything. But,
congrats to her. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, there are right ways to do things. There are wrong ways to do things. Right. And how do we help people with the right ways to do things? How do we help them do things in the ways that build them up and teach them more? And, that's why that's why I said, hey, let's talk. Let's be on the series, because I really want everyone to have access to the right ways to do things. And I say plural, right ways, plural.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Yeah. No, I mean, so with resilience too, it does not give me pause. It's not something I shy away from. I don't think it's a silver bullet, though. I do agree it's a skill that you can develop within the context of resilience in an organization. And you'd mentioned this topic of trust and psychological safety. I think that is a component of it. And so, your resilience, your level of individual resilience is something that you can develop, but you can create more resilience, a more resilient environment by doing certain things for people that work within the organization, right? Like they're going to have, everybody brings their whole selves to work every day, whether they realize it or not, or if they want to or not. And so there are certainly things beyond the borders of the organization that are not necessarily controllable, but within the organization, alleviating some of those unnecessary stresses and pressures is within scope, I think, of leaders in an organization. And so, giving people time to practice, not pushing tons and tons of change just because they're trying to get stuff done and they're not thinking about the gulp rate of the individuals who are consuming and being asked to do something differently. So I think I agree, yes, that there is a right way to do things, but I also think, I don't want to overthink this resilience, right? I don't want to make it something so, I don't want it to be a silver bullet either, because it's not. And that is, I think that's an important takeaway for people who are like, well, how do I develop resilience? How do I develop organizational resilience? It's a multifactorial. So in many ways.
Yeah, and I think you're right on target. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting is most people talk about trust, but they don't actually. If I pressed you, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if I pressed you to define trust, most of the time people come back with something that relates to trustworthiness.
Mm-hmm.
Trust isn't that.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is a decision you make to towards an expectation that someone else is going to do a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the risk of betrayal, what the consequences of that will be to you, and you do that because you believe you can accurately predict their future behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Rena is their last names, and I'm forgetting their first names at the moment. They talk about the fact that there are 3 areas of trust. And I think these are great ways for people to work on how to improve the situation in their organization.
Mm-hmm.
The first is contractual trust.
Mm-hmm.
Do we believe that the other person has made an agreement with us and they'll keep it? The second is communication trust. This one's the hard one. Do we believe that they'll communicate appropriately to us? And if there's a problem, they'll reach out. This is the one that every leader struggles with, right? Like, I don't know that my people will tell me it's wrong. The last one's confidence trust. And if you have a confidence problem for trust, well, then, you pursue HR solutions to that problem. But if you look at that, as a leader, how are you showing up? Are you
Mm-hmm.
meeting your contracts to your employees and to your peers? Are you communicating when there's a problem, when you need help? That's another big one.
Mm-hmm.
Executives don't like asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do those things? Because the things that you do, not the things you say, the things you do are what other people will key into and start to do.
And did you see the third one? And I was it confidence or competence?
Competence.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
Because I was like, what's confidence trust? So
sorry.
Got it. Right. So they have the ability to do what they are there to do. Makes sense. Hopefully, if you don't mind finding, what was the name of the person who wrote about it? Reeves, you said? I'd love to. I like how that person has framed it, or you have framed it. That makes a lot of sense. Because I think that thinking about trust from that perspective, that becomes more tangible. People can orient around that versus confident. Okay, perfect. I'll check that out. And I'll include this for people who are watching.
Yeah. So what I actually just pasted, and I'll get you to the book of that. But the other thing we kind of skipped over talking about briefly is the idea of generations in the workforce.
Yes.
And yes, we have 5 generations in the workforce. I got to tell you, I'm really tired of people slamming millennials and saying they job hop and they're not as, and I'm like, no, they're no different than you were. And I have the stats
it's Gen
to support
Z.
it.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, right. Like pick somebody to pick on, right?
Right.
The stats from the Bureau of Labor Statistics do not support anyone's belief that any of the younger folks, we'll just do it that way, are any different than any of us.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is we have roughly 1/3 of our working years is what the average tenure is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got 21 years of working, you probably have 7 years of tenure at the organization you're at. Mm-hmm. On average, you have 7 years. Mm-hmm. People are just people. Mm-hmm. When you treat them as people, it'll all work out.
Yeah. That's fair. I think good point. And where my head was at was some of the leaders that I have worked with and the differences in their style compared to, I guess as time went on, maybe my perspective changed and I experienced leadership differently. I don't know. So maybe I'm glad you called that out because I was sort of overgeneralizing 5 generations in the workforce.
Well, and I don't think it's you. I think you treated it very fairly. But I think I hear a lot of times where people are like, well, those millennials, they just can't do any. And I'm like, no, that's not truth.
Yeah.
Like, in God we trust, all others bring data. I have the data. I will bring the data and prove to you isn't math.
Yeah. It doesn't, what we're thinking doesn't line up with what the facts are saying. That's fair. Well, so you've obviously got a lot of experience in helping people and companies and kind of go through change and transformation and lead. If I am someone who is interested in getting, taking on a role, an OCM role in the workplace, where would I get started? Like, what do you recommend in terms of starting point? And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, go out and get certified, but what can people do to start to be the change they want to see in the organization?
Right. Well, so let me tell you, like, we put confident change management out there as a way to get a bunch of resources out there. We have a change models library that has 27 change models. So if you want the Rosetta Stone of, well, ProSci says this, and what does Cotter say?
And all the,
like, we pull it all together. It's 600 words, or you can watch 4 to 5 minute video, all free.
Perfect.
A whole bunch of assessments that are free. The book reviews, all the books that we're talking about, the book reviews are up there for you to read. That's just a great, there's a whole bunch of resources up there. And then if you said to me, I got tapped on the shoulder and I need to be a change management person.
Yeah.
Right. We do have a confident change management course that's 11 and a half hours of video. It's self-study. It's 900 pages of student handbook and lab. We let you go through the exercise. So you say, let's say SWOT or PESTLE or something. And then we show you at least 3, sometimes 5, but at least 3 examples of how other people have done it. So you can check your own work and go, yeah, I really got what was going on, or no, I didn't. And if the examples aren't enough to help you know how you did it, call us, send us an email, carrier pigeons. I mean, well, maybe not them. They tend to poop.
Yeah, right. So
reach out.
No, I mean, so thank you for sharing that, because that obviously a wealth of information and resources for people. What about just some, like quick and dirty, right? You're in the organization, you're put on a project, or you're being asked to support something. Like, what would be like 1 or 2 things that, how can I show up differently? How can I, like, what would you recommend to somebody who they'll go do what you just asked, right?
Yeah.
Or just
so what's
explain,
the tips?
like,
What's the tips? What's the quick takeaways?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So let's do anger. Okay. So we talked about resilience. We talked about, we talked sort of around this idea of staying centered. By the way, Richard Moon, who's an Aikido master, says, look, it's not like the great masters never lose their center.
Ooh,
it's
like
that they discover it quicker and they recover faster. So our goal is not to never lose our temper, never to get angry. Anger is actually not a bad emotion. Our goal is to recover faster. So here's how you do that. Anger is disappointment directed, which means if I feel anger, I need to ask myself, who or what am I disappointed in? And then the next step is why. That's a judgment. And then is that judgment, is that expectation generally, is that judgment appropriate? So that's number 1. The next time you get angry, ask yourself who or what you're disappointed in and why.
Yeah. Like it.
Number 2. Actually, do you have an area you want to point me to, and I'll see if I've got a quick little 1 tip for it.
In terms of like where to focus,
just anything like you see people struggling with. What do you see people struggling with?
Well, I mean, often what it comes down to is the relationship building piece and making human connections. I think there's, especially in an environment today where, I mean, people have worked remotely for a long time, but there's just more people that are doing that, and coming together virtually is powerful. And there's maybe more virtual in many ways for some individuals than not. And so I tend to focus on the relationship building piece when in any situation, right? Like, do you know the members of your team? Do you care enough to get to know them on a different level? Because that really becomes the say grease the skids of change within the organization. So that's where I sort of lean into. So if you agree with that, or if you have anything you want to build on top of that.
So here's something else you can go look at, and the book review will make sure to get into the show notes, right?
Yes.
The ethnographic interview, 1968, guy by the name of James Spradley. He wrote down a structure, a framework for how anthropologists go to understand new cultures. Use it.
You strongly recommend. Okay.
Sit down. It's a framework, and we're building an empathetic interviewing course so that you can use that and motivational interviewing and dialogue mapping, put those all together so that you can really understand something. But the short version is take the ethnographic interview and use it as a mechanism to get to the exact kind of relationship you're talking to. Because I talk to people, sometimes I'm talking to engineers and technical people, and they got the beanie on, the propeller hat or the aluminum foil. And they're like, I don't like people. And I'm like, I don't either. I like persons. How about you go meet some persons? And they struggle with, how do we even do it? What are the questions?
Right.
And the ethnographic interview starts with a grand tour. What's your day like? Jessica, what are you going to do next? Right? Like, are you going to pick up the kids? Are you going to go work out? What are you going to do next?
Right.
And then a specific of that. And then a mini tour. What is work like? What does work look like for you? Or, when you make dinner, what does that mean? Right? Like, is it McDonald's, use drive through, or are you doing these elaborate gourmet meals? Because that exposes me. And I know I'm not giving you time to respond, but that exposes me to the things that are interesting and exciting. And I get to see into your world, which I love.
Yeah. No, actually, I like that a lot. An activity that I encourage people to do is something called an about me slide. Like, just put pictures up of things that you care about, that you like to do, and just share that as an icebreaker in a meeting. And then people can ask you about it, in the future. And that's how you build those relationships. So ethnographic, that's really cool. And it makes me think about a lot of the different assessments that exist today, like DISC profile and all of those, because people are struggling to understand how to engage, especially with people that have different kind of initial reactions, or like tendencies and values and all of those things. So I think the more that people explore these topics, the better off they'll be, because they'll start to understand themselves, they'll understand others, and then they'll have that ability to engage with individuals who have different perspectives, which is kind of what happens when change and transformation occur within the workplace. You were so much fun to talk to. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to connect with me and share your wisdom with my community of I guess, change leaders and my network. And you've mentioned a couple of websites. I will put these in the show notes of where people can find you. Are you on social media? Can they connect with you on LinkedIn, or are you, how should people get in touch with you if they want to?
I don't hide.
You're out there.
The Confident Change Management, you can go to.
They can connect with you that way.
If you want a more broad way to reach me, which extends beyond the change management stuff I do, you can go to Thor Projects. The blog there has got, lots of stuff as well.
Fantastic.
And Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all the
things. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I learned a lot, and I've got a bunch of books I need to go read now because I'm inspired to go do that.
Just read the reviews.
Cliff Notes. I love that. I will definitely do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.